Hello, I'm Bill Salus, and today I'll be talking about the proxy war that shakes Israel. This teaching will be out of Isaiah 17 about the prophecies concerning the future of Damascus. Written between 740 and 701 BC, we find that these 14 verses in the chapter have lots of moving parts. First, we're going to find out that Damascus gets destroyed, and alongside of it, other major Syrian cities get desolated. Two, we're going to find out that the Israeli Defense Forces are responsible for the carnage, but in the process, the Jewish state seems to take a severe hit. We'll look closely at those portions of Scripture. Isaiah also prophesies that other nations seem to be included in the attackers, in addition to Syria of Israel. Who could they be? Could they be Iranian proxies like Syria is? We'll try to identify them in this as well. I have to admit right at the start that some of my teaching will be including current events, and I want to be careful to do that so as not to commit newspaper exegesis, which is the critical explanation or interpretation of a text, namely Scripture. However, when prophecies are stage-setting like the ones I'll be talking to you about today, then it's not surprising to find that current events will actually match up with some of the details of the prophecy. Also, I may be doing some speculating today with my conclusions, so don't take my word for what I'm teaching today. Be a Berean, like in Acts 17:11, who searched the Scriptures for themselves daily to confirm what they were hearing. Now, with that said, I sincerely believe that what I'm about to teach you today is highly likely to happen, it's plausible, and it could happen very soon. Before I begin the teaching today, I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Proxy Depot Ministries, Bill Salus. You see it up there on the screen. We're putting forward timely and relevant prophetic content in these end times. As an example, here's a couple of shows I was on, and they've been posted on YouTube and have received lots of views dealing with this timely prophetic information. For instance, the Jimmy Evans Tipping Point show on February 15th of 2023 has received 337,710 views already. It was entitled The Next End Times Prophecy Revealed. Also, I was on the Eric Stakelback The Watchman show talking about, does Psalm 83 describe Israel's war before Gog of Magog? You see that has 355,000 views, and that is on July 2nd of 2022. So please consider subscribing to our Prophecy Depot Ministries Bill Salus YouTube page. So by way of review, it's important to remember that Syria has been involved in wars with Egypt and Jordan against Israel in modern history. They were involved in the Arab-Israeli War of Independence in 1948. They were involved again in the Six-Day War in June of 1967. They were also involved in the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Now, of course, Egypt and Jordan got tired of getting beaten and found it politically expedient to form peace treaties with Israel. We see Jimmy Carter in 1979 met with Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel at Camp David, and they formulated a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Bill Clinton followed stride in 1994. He met with Hussein of Jordan and Yitzhak Rabin of Israel at Wadi Araba, and they put the treaty together between Jordan and Israel. However, Syria has no treaty with Israel. Matter of fact, meanwhile, Israel and Syria are still at war, and Syria has mustered up some new friends, a whole menu of new evil, wicked neighbors, including Iranian proxies, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. You see Syria there. Iraq has Shiite militias, of Iranian-backed Shiite militias. Iran, of course, now that you got the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank. The Houthis down below Yemen, all Iranian proxies, the Hamas in Gaza, and they're all involved in, I believe, the proxy war that shakes Israel, which I'll be teaching on today. Now, I want to show you what these people are capable of doing. In a recent headline, all these proxies, these terrorists and enemies of Israel. This came out in Israel National News on August 7th of 2023, and here's the headline. The predicted scenario could be 6,000 rockets at Israel during first days of war with Hezbollah. Now, this would involve Hezbollah, but also the proxies as well. But this is focused primarily just on Hezbollah. And the article goes on to say, within the first few days, about 6,000 rockets would be launched at the Jewish state. As time progresses, the number would decline to about only 1,500 to 2,000. rockets a day. Security experts estimate that every day there would be approximately 1,500. So as it winds down, they're saying approximately 1,500 effective strikes in Israeli territory. And that is after subtracting rockets that statistically land in open areas and other ones that are intercepted by the Iron Dome system. So what they're saying is there'll be about 6,000 missiles that could come from Hezbollah in a day in the beginning, and then as time progresses, they'll narrow down to 1,500 to 2,000 just from Hezbollah in a day, effective ones that don't land indiscriminately in fields and or get intercepted by the Iron Dome. So we can see that this is a very lethal threat just from Hezbollah themselves, who has approximately 150,000 missiles, some precision guided, pointed at a bank of targets inside of Israel.
The Second Lebanon War. It was sparked by a Hezbollah ambush on 2 IDF jeeps on patrol in northern Israel, which killed 3 Israeli soldiers and saw 2 reservists taken hostage. The ensuing war was marked by an onslaught of rockets and missiles from Lebanon. Israel's goal became to destroy the rocket launchers. The price was heavy. 119 Israeli soldiers fell fighting Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and over 800 Lebanese were killed, including Hezbollah operatives. 13 years later, Hezbollah has rebuilt its rocket launchers and expanded its weapons arsenal to an estimated 100,000 missiles. The weapons themselves have also improved. Now the two sides continue exchanging wars of words, but the fighting has expanded for Israel's northern front to not only Lebanon, but Lebanon and Syria, where with the help of the Iranian regime, Hezbollah has managed to establish a military foothold.
So before I move on to the next slide, let's take a look at what's being said under the headline here. It reads, Israel's defense establishment is preparing for the worst case scenario during a war on the northern border, which would include days-long blackouts, hundreds dead, and thousands wounded. Now, this is far more dangerous than the war that Israel had with Hezbollah in 2006, that summer of July and August, 34-day war. 4,000 missiles launched from Hezbollah into northern Israel, kept many residents in Haifa in bomb shelters throughout most of that time. But we're talking about a scenario here where 6,000 rockets, more advanced rockets, could come in on day one and then level out to 1,500 to 2,000 thereafter. Effective missiles. Now, Israel has been preparing for this very type of scenario. In May of 2022, they had one of their largest military drills in their history called Chariots of Fire, a drill prepared to attack Iranian nuclear facilities and respond to Iranian proxies in retaliation coming against Israel, but also preparing for casualties inside of Israel. So Israel is very much aware and very concerned about the threat that's developed around them. Now, when we get into Isaiah chapter 17, we'll look at verse 1 to start with here. It says, the burden against Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease from being city, it will be a ruinous heap. And that's the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history. It dates back to the time of Abraham. It's the capital of Syria. Prophecy predicts that someday it will cease to exist. It will be reduced to rubble. Now, of course, Israel has not been shy about attacking Damascus. Even this year, I'm going to show you 3 headlines that have happened with Israel attacking Damascus even this year. So this should come as no surprise that at some point Damascus will be ceased from being a city. It will be destroyed. Here's a PBS NewsHour report that goes back to April 5th of 2023. Israeli airstrikes on Syria intensify, raise tensions with Iran. They have hit the airports of Damascus and Aleppo. So they're also hitting major cities, not just Damascus. You'll find out that's part of the prophecy also coming up. Apparently this is intended to prevent the flow of arms shipments into Syria. AP has 2 headlines here. Also this year we have, in August 6th, we have at least 4 Syrian soldiers killed in suspected Israeli airstrikes around Damascus. Another one here in April it looks like July of this year. Suspected Israeli airstrikes hit Damascus and the surrounding areas. The point being, Israel is striking Damascus. Syria and Israel are still at war.
Israeli rockets struck residential buildings in Damascus, killing at least 15 people. Now, according to the police officials, the strike damaged several buildings in the densely populated area close to the Umayyad Square in the heart of the capital. The head of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights described the incident as the deadliest Israeli attack in the Syrian capital.
Now, there are some people who don't agree with me and many other colleagues that Isaiah 17, especially the destruction of Damascus, is a future unfulfilled prophecy. They believe that it was fulfilled, most of these guys would say, in 732 BC by the Assyrian Empire, when they did attack and conquer Damascus. But because of that, I've written an appendix in my Future War Prophecies book called Why the Destruction of Damascus is a Future War Prophecy. Now, I'll be going through this video and bringing out forward a few reasons why I think it's pretty clear that this was not historically fulfilled at that time. And especially at the end, I'll give some historical accounts of that as well. So they believe the Assyrian Empire was responsible in 732 BC for destroying Damascus. However, I find it interesting that in Isaiah's 66 chapters, Assyria is mentioned 37 times, and Assyria or the Assyrian is mentioned 41 times. However, not once is it mentioned in all 14 verses in Isaiah 17. I think that's because it's not Assyria that's responsible. We're told in Isaiah 17 verse 9 who is responsible, and it's the Israeli Defense Forces. It says in that day that Damascus ceases from being a city, in that day his strong cities, not just Damascus, will be as a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. The children of Israel, in other words, the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, the other thing, too, to watch here, we're told in the final verse of Isaiah 17 that this destruction appears to happen overnight. Looks like it could have a nuclear implication. Then behold, at eventide trouble, and before the morning he, was speaking of Damascus in the masculine pronoun, is no more. And this is the portion of those who plunder us and the lot of those who rob us, alluding to the fact that Israel is acting in self-defense. They're being plundered and robbed by the enemies, Syrian strong cities, as well as Damascus. And I believe the proxies we're going to find out as well. So on September 6th of 2007, Israel struck at Al-Kubar, the nuclear reactor in Syria. However, operating under the policy of plausible deniability, they didn't admit to it until March of 2018. Why did they wait so long? Well, remember that they knew Donald Trump was president at that time, and as a campaign promise, he had promised that he would back out of the JCPOA nuclear deal with Iran. So it looks like Israel is letting Iran know that they don't have a problem with striking nuclear reactors. Matter of fact, they had a history of doing this on the 14-year anniversary of June 7th of the Six-Day War in 1981, when they struck out Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactors. So they were letting Iran know that they have no problem striking nuclear facilities. Now, I had stated that according to Isaiah 17:9, it's the Israeli Defense Forces and not the Assyrian Empire that's responsible for the destruction of Damascus, but also the desolation of other strong or major Syrian cities. So to find out what other major cities we might be talking about in modern-day Syria, we have to fast forward to Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27. Here's what we find out in verse 23. Against Damascus, Hamath and Arpad are shamed. They have heard bad news. They are faint-hearted. There is trouble on the sea, and it cannot be quiet. Well, that would be today. Arpad would likely be Aleppo, which is the #1 populated city in Syria. Homs would be Hamath, probably the #3 populated city, and then Damascus is the #2 populated city. But what's interesting in this verse is it talks about there's trouble on the sea. And if we take that literally, that's probably the Mediterranean Sea. That trouble is causing these cities to be faint-hearted. It's bad news for them. Well, this is where Israel has Dolphin-class submarines that can launch nuclear weapons. Matter of fact, a headline from the National Interest in May of 2019 states, Israel is an underwater nuclear power thanks to German submarines. Now the prophecy goes on to say in verses 24 and 25, Damascus has grown feeble, she turns to flee, and fear has seized her. Anguish and sorrows have taken her like a woman in labor. But then the rhetorical question gets asked in verse 25, why is the city of praise not deserted, the city of my joy? Well, the city of God's joy is Jerusalem. Why is it not deserted? Why is it still standing, apparently? Whereas Damascus has been destroyed and reduced to rubble. Now we find out in Isaiah 17:9 that the Israeli Defense Forces are involved in Isaiah 17, but we don't know who's involved in Jeremiah chapter 49, but we might have a hint here. Of course, it's dealing with Jerusalem, it's dealing with Israel, and probably the Israeli Defense Forces. This may be our hint, that this is also involving the Israeli Defense Forces. It goes on to say, therefore her young men in Syria shall fall in her streets. That would be civilian casualties. And the men of war shall be cut off in that day, says the Lord of hosts. The men of war shall be cut off in that day would equate to military casualties of war. Verse 27 concludes Jeremiah's prophecy and says, I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad would be a name for a Syrian king. The palaces, of course, would probably be today government buildings of the leaders, Assad's headquarters, etc. Here's a article headline from the Jerusalem Post, probably relative to what we're talking about here in June of 2022. Israel warns Syrian President Assad, we will bomb palaces if Iran operations continue. Okay, let's just do a little bit of math here. If Isaiah wrote Isaiah chapter 17 between 740 and 701 BC, and then more than 100 years later, Jeremiah wrote chapter 49, verses 23 through 27. That would mean that if in 732 BC the Assyrian Empire conquered and destroyed Damascus in fulfillment of Isaiah 17, that the city of Damascus would have to be rebuilt again in order for Jeremiah's prophecy to find fulfillment as a separate prophecy. Now, in all of my research, I have found no historical evidence to support that happened. In fact, I'm going to give you a couple quotes from my Future War Prophecies book that seem to substantiate what I'm saying. The first one is going to be out of the Tyndale Bible Dictionary on page 346, which says, the Assyrian king Tilgath-Pileser III agreed and marched against the Syro-Israelite confederation. After defeating Israel, he attacked Damascus, plundered the city, deported the population, and replaced them with foreigners from other captured lands. Damascus was no longer an independent city-state. Due to its key location, Damascus remained important, and the Assyrians used the city as a provincial capital. Now that's interesting. I comment on that quote as follows. The biblical text in Isaiah 17:1 is clearly saying Damascus is about to be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. This seems to suggest strongly that the city of Damascus is removed from being a city because of the utter devastation that results in the city becoming a fallen ruin. Since this is the case, it does not seem to make sense that the Assyrians deported the population and replaced them with foreigners in a city that has been reduced to ruins. In addition, how can the Assyrians use the city of Damascus as a provincial capital when it's a fallen ruin? Most importantly, there is no historical evidence that the Assyrians in 732 BC had to totally rebuild the city of Damascus after it had become a fallen ruin before moving the people to live in there. Now here's a quote from George Smith, who worked in the Assyriology department of the British Museum. He's a world-renowned expert on the history of the Assyrians, and he authored a book in 1876 called The Ancient History from the Monuments, Assyria from the Earliest Times to the Fall of Nineveh. And he explains on pages 87 and 88 the following. Tilgath-Pileser now led his army to Damascus. After crucifying the captains of the Assyrian army who had fallen into his hands and closely invested the Syrian capital, Tilgath-Pileser tells us that he shut up Rezon in Damascus like a caged bird and cut down all the fine forests around the city for use in the siege, not leaving a single tree near the capital. Several places round were spoiled, and 16 districts of Damascus were destroyed like a flood. 591 cities were captured and spoiled, and the whole of the kingdom of Rezon was subdued. Damascus, however, held out, and could only be reduced by famine, so leaving part of his army before the city, Tilgath-Pileser marched against the other rebels. Now, concerning the historical account by George Smith, I follow up with these comments in the Future War Prophecies book. Notice that the famous historian of the history of the Assyrians said 16 districts of Damascus were destroyed like a flood. Damascus, however, held out and could only be reduced by famine. He is obviously saying that the 16 districts of Damascus that were destroyed like a flood are not what took place to the actual capital city of Damascus. And this would also mean that the city of Damascus was not destroyed like the ruins from the flood either. This seems to be substantiated by the Moody Bible commentary on page 1031. And I write this also in the Future War Prophecies book. It certainly did not believe that Tiglath-Pileser III's conquest destroyed the city of Damascus like ruins from the flood, when it states in the Moody Bible commentary Tiglath-Pileser III's conquest would be a mere foreshadowing of a far more serious conquest at the end of days. Now, additionally, there's a plethora of Bible scholars who believe Isaiah 17 that agree with me that it's a future event, such as Joel Rosenberg, Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum, Hal Lindsey, Vernon McGee, Dr. Chuck Missler, Jack Hibbs, Dr. David Reagan, Amir Sarfati, Tom Hughes, Thomas Ice, Jan Markell, and Brandon Holthouse, just to name a few. So by way of review, the arguments for a future Isaiah 17 fulfillment are: 1, Isaiah 17 verse 9 tells us the desolation is caused by the Israeli defense forces, not by the Assyrian Empire. 2, Assyria or Assyrians are listed 37 to 41 times in 66 chapters, but 0 times in Isaiah 17. Assyria also deported the population from Assyria and replaced them with foreigners from captured lands. How could you do that in a city that was reduced to fallen ruins? Assyrians used Damascus as a provincial capital as well. Damascus held out and was only reduced by famine, not destroyed. And also top Bible scholars believe Isaiah 17 is a future event. So these would be some arguments against historical fulfillment of the Assyrian Empire, of fulfillment of Isaiah 17 in 732 BC. So whether or not you agree with the long list of Bible scholars who believe that Isaiah 17 remains unfulfilled, to be fulfilled in the future, I think we can all agree that Syria poses a dangerous threat to Israel. They've got chemical weapons. Here's a report done by NPR back in February of 2019, results of a study. The headline reads, more than 300 chemical attacks were launched during the Syrian civil war. Syria has chemical weapons plants all over the country. This is a Syria's chemical weapons site across Syria map. Now, Israeli researchers say that Syria's institute is disguised as a civilian research center, but is used by Iran to develop advanced missiles and chemical weapons inside of Syria. Now, here's an article that came out on August 2nd of 2023, and it's from I-24 News, based out of Israel, which says the Israeli report warns Iran is helping Syria develop chemical weapons. The report goes on to say, in a report, Israeli researchers suggested that Iran is helping Syria build its arsenal of chemical and advanced weapons for possible use by the Islamic Republic, its proxies, and Russia. The two researchers charged that Iran's focus in Syria is to develop and manufacture precision missiles and rockets, cruise missiles, and unmanned aerial vehicles. I think it's important along these lines to reflect back to an article back in September of 2018 in Israel National News. Iranian official, we will fight the enemy from Lebanon. This was comments from Hossein Salami, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard deputy commander. It says the senior Revolutionary Guard official explains the problem of Israel's existence. It says Hezbollah has over 100,000 missiles ready for launch. Now that was back in 2018. We believe now they've got over 150,000 missiles ready to launch at Israel. This report came out August 5th of 2023 out of the Arab World. It says Israeli report warns of Syrian chemical weapons available to Hezbollah. So we see that Iran now is not only developing with Syria chemical weapons inside of Syria for Syria's use, which they did use in their civil war, but also for Hezbollah to get their hands on, posing a double threat to Israel from a chemical weapons perspective.
The Alma report details that the Syrian regime possesses extensive chemical capabilities that it sees as a guarantee of its survival. Remember, There is a track record here with the Assad regime and WMDs. Assad used them against his own people during the Syrian civil war, and Israel destroyed a Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007. But the most chilling section of this report from the Alma Research and Education Center is this, and I quote, Hezbollah's use of chemical weapons in the next confrontation with Israel cannot be ruled out. It is conceivable that missiles and rockets armed with chemical weapons, such as sarin nerve gas, are being stockpiled for use by Hezbollah in one of the SIRS center sites in the Masayef area and will be transferred to Lebanon if so directed. The Alma research team goes on to say, quote, we estimate with a high probability that in a situation of war, Israel will attack the chemical weapon stockpiles wherever they are in Syria and or Lebanon. Folks, wow, in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected and talk about prophetic implications. I'm thinking in particular the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, verse 1, which describes the eventual demise of Damascus. 150,000 rockets and missiles, 2,000 attack drones, and some 45,000 battle-hardened, battle-tested foot soldiers. I'm talking about Hezbollah, the Iranian regime's most lethal and dangerous proxy.
Now, at the onset of this video, I had mentioned that when Israel goes to war with Syria in Isaiah 17, and it destroys Damascus and desolates some major Syrian cities, that it also in the process suffers a severe hit, a shaking, if you will. And we find that in Isaiah 17 verses 4 through 6, which tells us in that day, and of course that's the day that Israel destroys Damascus and desolates major Syrian cities, it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob, read that is the nation of Israel, the glory of Jacob will wane, and the fatness of his flesh grow lean. It shall be as when the harvester gathers the grain and reaps the heads with his arm. It shall be as one who gathers the heads of grain in the valley of Rephaim, yet gleaning grapes will be left in it, like the shaking of an olive tree. 2 or 3 olives on the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in its most fruitful branches, says the Lord God of Israel. Now let's unpack that and see what is being said here, because it doesn't look like a good picture for Israel. The glory of Jacob will wane, and the fatness of his flesh will grow lean in the process in that day that Damascus gets destroyed during that Israeli-Syrian war. So we're told that in that day the glory of Jacob will fade. In verse 4, his fatness of his flesh will become lean. It'll be like a reaper gathering the standing grain. Verse 5, some gleaning grapes will be left in it. It'll be like the shaking of an olive tree, with only 2 or 3 olives on the topmost bough, and 4 or 5 on the branches of the fruitful tree. So we're talking about an agricultural idioms here that's important to understand what Isaiah is telling us by using these idioms, by digressing from a wheat harvest, going through the grape harvest, on through to the olive harvest. So I want to give you my interpretation of Isaiah 17, 4 through 6 as I write it in the Future War Prophecies book. I say the glory of Jacob will wane. Jacob represents Israel according to Genesis 32 verses 28. That's when Jacob's name was renamed to Israel. Prior to the Syrian-Israeli conflict that leads to the obliteration of Damascus, Israel is noted to possess glory. The use of glory depicts Israel in an exalted condition. It's likely describes a prosperous and robust nation of world renown, but as a result of the war, Israel's glory wanes. This suggests that the Jewish state's prominence falls from the heights of its power, prosperity, and influence. I go on to say, the downward slide of Israel's glory leads to the diminishment of its resources. The nation becomes lean, which is a term sometimes associated with a third world country that tends to be highly impoverished, economically unstable, and economically dependent upon industrialized nations. Thus it appears that Israel enters into the conflict as a country blessed by the fatness of its own resources, but in a short order seemingly digresses into a lean nation. So he gets into the harvesting of the gleaning of the wheat, the gleaning of the grapes, and the shaking of the olive tree. And here's what I say about this as I break each individual aspect down. It shall be as when the harvester gathers grain. The conditions inside Israel at the start of the war appear to be economically sound. The grain harvest, which typically happens in the month of May, is yielding a robust crop. The harvester reaps the heads with his arm, it shall be as one who gathers heads of grain. So in other words, going into the war, as the analogy, everything is pretty robust. The glory of Jacob is there. It hasn't been waning yet. Fatness of his flesh has not grown lean as they enter into the war in this analogy. Then we talk about the gleaning of the grapes that will be left in it. So however, as the war progresses, the healthy grain harvest scales down to a meager gleaning of grapes in the ensuing grape season. Only gleanings are what's left over after when the gatherers have finished collecting the clusters in a robust grape season. The grape harvest usually occurs in the fall, sometime in August or September. Thus, from a healthy grain harvest in May, only table scrap grape gleanings are available around August. So in other words, now we get into the second stage of the war, and you start to see Israel's glory starting to wane and his fatness of his flesh starting to wax lean. Like there's only gleanings of grapes left rather than a true grape harvest. It's a subsequent harvesting season, May with the wheat, August or September with the grapes rather. Then we get into the olive. We're going to talk about the olive tree, which is a prominent tree inside of Israel. Matter of fact, it was in January 28, 2021, you see this headline, the olive tree is selected as Israel's national tree. So olives are very prominent in Israel. It's a tree found all over Israel. It can grow up to 50 feet, and a large tree could have upward of 500,000 olives if it's in a small fruited variety. So then there's going to be a shaking. So then Israel goes on to experience a severe shaking, like the shaking of an olive tree. And I write this: from a healthy grain harvest to an essentially non-existent grape season. Now Isaiah touches upon the olive tree shaking scenario. The olive picking season in Israel usually follows the grape season and occurs around October and November. The olive tree is a mainstay of Israel's farming economy. Here's a quote on that. There are currently 340,000 dunams of olive trees planted across Israel, producing over 15,000 tons of oil and over 24,000 tons of edible olives annually. The olive tree in Israel have been around for centuries, if not millennia. And a dunam is approximately 900 square meters, which is equivalent to about 0.22 acres. So there's a severe shaking that takes place. We find out that Isaiah 17:6 says that after the severe shaking caused by the conflict, there will only be 2 or 3 olives at the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in the most fruitful branches. So instead of the annual production of 15,000 tons of oil and over 24,000 tons of edible olives, it seems that as a result of this war, there will be no olive harvest at all. This agricultural scenario depicts how Israel's glory fades and the fatness of the nations grows lean. This is a picture of how the Syrian Israeli war devastates Israel and provokes the nation to destroy Damascus. The sequential grain, grape, and olive harvest seasons do not necessarily tell us how long the conflict lasts. Rather, they draw our attention to the dramatic downward digression of events brought about by the war. Israel is not in a position to wage a several months long war of attrition with Syria and other proxies of Iran, so this conflict will not likely last very long. But the results of the warring factions will be devastating.
گاهی سردمداران رژیم صهیونیستی ما رو تهدید هم میکنن، تهدید به حمله نظامی میکنن، اما به نظرم خودشون هم میدانند و اگر نمیدانند بدانند که اگر غلطی از اونها سر بزند جمهوری اسلامی تل آویو و حیفا رو با خاک یکسان خواهد کرد.
So let's visualize this, what I think Isaiah is saying here. Let's superimpose an olive tree on the nation of Israel. And it tells us that it'd be like a shaking of an olive tree with 2 or 3 olives at the top of the uppermost bough. Let's say the uppermost bough represents Haifa. You know, there's 500,000 potential olives on an olive tree, but there's only 2 or 3 left in the uppermost bough, and 4 or 5 in its most fruitful branches. Let's say that could be down around Tel Aviv, as these proxies who have chemical weapons and precision-guided missiles, as well with about 150,000 of them pointed at Israel. Even the Houthis down below in the Yemen area said they have precision-guided missiles that can hit Tel Aviv. Now you got the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank. You got the Hamas in the Gaza, Shiite militias in Iraq. Iran itself could be involved in this directly. Syria, of course, Hezbollah. Matter of fact, talking about Haifa and Tel Aviv, here's a headline that came out in 2023, April 18th, Al Arabiya News. Raisi, the president of Iran, says Iran would destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa if Israel attacks. So, my friends, we're talking about a very grave situation whereby Israel takes a severe hit like a shaking of an olive tree. Okay, so we've looked at Isaiah 17:1, which talks about the destruction of Damascus, a city that will be no more, or will be reduced to rubble. We looked at how that would be caused by the children of Israel and not the Assyrian Empire, as for Isaiah 17 verse 9. But also that verse tells us that there'll be desolation of major cities in Syria by the Israeli Defense Forces, probably Aleppo and Homs, in addition to Damascus. We also looked at the fact that Israel's glory would wane, his flesh would wax lean, like the shaking of an olive tree, a severe hit they seem to take in Isaiah 17, verses 4 through 6. But at the beginning of the video, I also said that there appears to be other nations involved in attacking Israel in the Syrian-Israel war. Let's take a look at the verses that might find application there in Isaiah 17, verses 12 and 13, which say, "Woe to the multitude of many people, who make a noise like the roar of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, plural, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations, plural, will rush like the rushing of many waters. But God will rebuke them, and they will flee far away, and be chased like the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before the whirlwind." So it appears to me that there's more people attacking Israel than just Syria, nations per se involved, terrorist populations perhaps the proxies of Iran. But when they see Damascus get destroyed, it'll be like God's rebuke, and they will flee far, far away. And result, when they see that the devastation happened to Damascus. And we found out in Isaiah 17:14 that probably happens overnight. One night you see to him, Damascus, in the masculine pronoun, but in the morning he, Damascus, is gone, no more, reduced to rubble, a ruinous heap. But let's see, it says, "And they'll be chased like the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before the whirlwind." You know, there's a parallel passage to that in Psalm 83, verse 13, which says, "Oh my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind." Now, Psalm 83 is the subject of a different video that I'll be doing. It's also covered extensively in my Future War Prophecies book. But you see, inside of the Psalm 83 Confederacy, which will ultimately want to wipe Israel off the map in that prophecy, you see that the proxies of Iran are involved there as well. And when the shaking takes place in Israel and Syria gets destroyed, these proxies, if they're the nations, the rushing seas per se, in that idiom, they will flee far away as well because of the devastation that Israel causes. Now we have a headline that came out just recently from Reuters. This was on August 2023. It says, "Israel threatens to return Lebanon to Stone Age in the war with Hezbollah." So we have a very interesting situation. Israel is saying that they will turn Hezbollah into the Stone Age. We've looked at this video. We've seen how Hezbollah is likely going to get their hands on chemical weapons. In concert with Syria, they may use those in a war with Israel. So this is a very threatening situation. So in conclusion, are we looking at mere rumors of war in all that we've studied here in this video today, or are we looking at a coming conflict of epic biblical proportions? You know, Jesus said in Matthew 24 that in the end times there would be rumors of war, and certainly there's plenty of that going on. But is Iran going to roll back its nuclear program and stop the production of its hypersonic missiles, which at this point can reach Israel in 400 seconds, which is 6.66 minutes, and they can carry a nuclear warhead? Is Hezbollah going to dismantle its precision-guided missiles or point them somewhere else besides Israel? Is Syria going to get rid of its chemical weapons? I don't think so. I think we're looking at a conflict that is so severe that Israel, in a prison rules fight, has no choice but to destroy a major Syrian city, Damascus, the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history. Only time will tell, but I think time is ticking rapidly at this point. I really want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, and if you have not already done so, please consider subscribing to our YouTube page at Prophecy Depot Ministries. Bill Salus, you can go on YouTube and search Prophecy Depot Ministries, Bill Salus. Also, take the time to visit our product page at prophecydepot.com. You'll find my books and DVDs there. We even have bundle deals, discounts of books and DVDs for you. While you're there, also check out our spiritual survival kit for those left behind thumb drive. It's specifically designed for your loved ones who might get left behind so they can know it's forthcoming in the days in which they'll be living. It would include a Bible, some letters of instructions from me to them, my books and DVDs for the Here to Eternity series, the Now Prophecies, what could happen now at the present time, the Next Prophecies, what has a few preconditions but are stage setting, could happen after the Now Prophecies. The Now Prophecies have no more preconditions. The Last Prophecies, which include the prophecies in the first half of the tribulation, the Final Prophecies, which include the prophecies in the second half and final half of the tribulation. And then we conclude the series with the Millennium Prophecies and the New Jerusalem. Additionally, while you're there, you'll see my new book and DVD called The Future War Prophecies. And you see some of the topics that are discussed there: the First War of Iran, the war we talked about in this video with Israel and Syria, the proxy war that shakes Israel, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. You see the list of these different topics up there. Please visit and consider purchasing this book and DVD as well.
The beast shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and they that dwell on earth shall wonder when they behold the beast that was, and is not, yet is.
In the last days, humankind will dwell in a war-torn world. Ancient biblical prophecies predict devastating regional conflicts in the Middle East, as well as world wars spanning the globe. Conventional battles, nuclear exchanges, and supernatural demonic invasions are coming. Billions will die. Famines, pestilences, and scarcities will plague the planet. As a result of these future wars, humankind will clamor for a leader who can restore order out of the chaos. The Bible calls him Antichrist. The Future War Prophecies book locates the battlefields, identifies the participants, explains the motives, provides the details, and explores the outcomes of these coming world-changing conflicts, which include the war fought between Israel and Iran, including its proxies of Syria, Hezbollah, and Hamas, the destruction of Damascus, the final war that ends the Arab-Israeli conflict, the invasion of Israel for plunder and booty by Russia, Turkey, Iran, and their 9-member coalition, the 2 Christian-killing crusades of the tribulation period, the demonic invasion that torments unsaved people for 5 months, the 200 million demonic army that kills 1/3 of humankind, the war in heaven between Michael the Archangel versus Satan, the battle of Armageddon between Jesus Christ versus Antichrist, the final Gog of Magog war at the end of the millennium. These wars and more are covered in this revealing book and DVD. Don't be caught in the crossfire. Discover what wars are coming so that you can keep yourself and your loved ones out of harm's way. Order your copies of the Future War Prophecies book and DVD today.